Well, hello. Hi, Norman Patnode. How are you?
Hi, Gwen. I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Gwen Riedel, and I'm with Better Humans, formerly, known recently. We've rebranded, and we are still Coachdotme. Coaching happens through Coachdotme, but our overall company now is Better Humans, and so this is you've tuned into Better Leaders podcast, and today my guest is Norman Patnode, and he is an expert in project management, productivity, uh, systems thinking, lots of things, and so I'm really excited to have an opportunity to talk with him. He is with a company called ProChain, ProChain Solutions, and ProChain helps project managers get ahead at work so they can enjoy their professional and personal lives. So we get to hear from an expert on completing projects faster. And so not just about personal productivity, but really about team productivity as well, I think. So welcome, Norman. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what what you'd like us to know about you.
Well, thanks, Gwen. I've been with ProChain Solutions for a little over 19 years now, and essentially spending my time working with primarily large organizations, helping them step into this new way of doing project work that results in projects finishing dramatically faster and much more predictably. And at the heart of that, there's a number of pieces that are all fit together to form a system solution. But at the heart of it is the ability to know what's the most important thing I need to finish, focus on that, get it done, hand that work off to whoever is waiting on it, catch your breath, and then do it again.
Wow. And so how do you where do you start with a team?
Well, you start with getting agreement on what done is for the project. And so at the personal level, and a lot of people make to-do lists, and I'll make to-do lists as well. But if you think about your to-do list as, here's all the things I could be working on. And honestly, when do you stop putting things on the list? You know, it's the backlog, if you will. And so at a personal level, something that I have found very useful, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I'm a night owl as opposed to a morning person. So I tend to do this as the last thing I do before I end my day. I think about the next day and I make my to finish list. Now, this might sound just like semantics, but I basically, looking at that to-do list, I decide what's the most important thing I need to finish. And so I'll build my to finish list. Many days there's just one thing on my to finish list. Well, that doesn't mean that's the only thing I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to have people to call with questions. I'm going to, have interruptions for different things, different clients. But that to finish list is my steerage point of that's what I'm going to try and spend my time on. That's where I'm going to try and focus, to put as much focus effort as I can and get that finished. So at a personal level, if you work that way, you'll find you can get a lot more done. Instead of working on lots of things but finishing nothing, juggling all these balls but not finishing anything. So that's at the personal level. Now, if you take that to a project level, it's that same comparison and contrast. If everybody who's supporting your project is working on lots of things but not finishing anything, progress isn't making the progress, or the project isn't making the progress that it could. Right? So in any project, there is a chain of tasks that determines how quickly you get done. The way you get the project done faster is you strive to get as much focus work on the tasks at the front of that longest chain. We call it the critical chain. So those tasks at the front of the critical tasks. You strive to get as much focus work as you can, to get those finished as quick as you can. As a team, What can we do to avoid delays on the critical tasks? What else can we do to speed up completion of those critical tasks? And when you finish a critical task in a project, you finish your task, somebody else is waiting on the work that you're doing. So you make sure you have a handoff. So it's kind of like running a relay race down the chain of tasks. And the more you can do that, the quicker you'll get the project done. And the more predictable you get it done. Because when you're switching back and forth, you're just introducing a lot of variability, a lot of uncertainty, and oftentimes mistakes as well. When you keep interrupting, either getting interrupted or even interrupting yourself, you introduce mistakes that lead to rework.
I would imagine in a project there, well, I'm getting feedback. I would imagine in a project there are often things that are multiple priorities are important at the same time. How do you prioritize?
So I said we start by getting agreement on what's done for the project. The next step is to get alignment on how we're going to move forward on that. And the way we do that is you bring together the knowledge in the room so that you can build out a model of the workflow. So it's not just a list of tasks. It's, what has to happen before what. It's like I have to put on my socks before I put on my boots, before I lace up my boots. If you try and do those in a different way, well, your kids are going to laugh at you. So you're mapping out what's there. And a lot of that in the project work, a lot of times that's figuring that out. It's thinking through, well, can we do these in parallel? Do they have to be in series? So once you build out that model of the workflow, you can use that model to identify what's the longest chain and what's the next longest chain and how much slack is there between there and what's the next longest and the next long. And we call those, so the longest one we call the critical chain. The others we call shadow chains because they tend to hide in the shadow of the critical chain and not get the attention that they should. So if I've got one chain that's the longest and another that's only 2 days shorter, well, I need to pay attention to the task at the beginning of both of those chains. If I've got another chain that's got 40 days of slack relative to the critical chain, I don't necessarily have to pay attention to that today. If I've got resources to work it, that's fine. But if I don't, that task can wait. So the team uses that model of the workflow, which they build initially, and they revisit on a regular basis to make sure it reflects how they indeed plan on doing the work. And they use that model to be able to identify what are the critical tasks. And then as a team, at least weekly, they have conversations about how do we avoid delays on those critical tasks? What else can we do to speed up those critical tasks? And then they again look at that longest chain and say, who's got ideas on things we could do to shorten that? And so that's an ongoing process. In most large development project, most teams are on a weekly cadence, but this works on whatever cadence makes sense for your world. Is that making sense? Is that helpful?
It is. I'm wondering what do you see are the most common challenges that individuals have in implementing this methodology?
Yeah, so doing focus work is it's a skill that you can learn and you can get better with practice. And so when we go in and we start working with organizations, I'll often ask individuals to just for 2 or 3 days keep a log, right? It's your interruption log, your focus log, whatever you want to call it. But the way I ask them to do that is, so first off, what's the most important task you need to finish? Looking at your calendar, and perhaps you look at that and say, I've got 45 minutes before this meeting I have to go to. I'm going to focus on this task for 45 minutes. You kind of make this contract with yourself. So if something interrupts you from spending that 45 minutes on what you agreed was the most important thing you need to be doing, take a moment and jot down what interrupted you and how long the interruption lasted. And if you do that for 2 or 3 days and you go start looking at the data, what people typically find is that first off, about half the interruptions are things we do to ourselves. So the good news is you have control of that. You can change that. The other half are interruptions coming from the outside, and many of them from your other team members. So if you have a conversation as a team and agree on, we call these work norms, but basically a work norm is just a set of agreements that a group of people agree to follow to help everyone work at their best. So work norms can be as simple as, we're all sitting in this space and I need to talk to you. Rather than getting up and walking over, I holler across the room. which interrupts everybody else. I mean, so I've seen some of the things that people put on the table as work norms that you're thinking, this seems just so obvious that you wouldn't do this. But just having conversations to say, well, okay, this would help. So getting agreement on that reduces the number of interruptions, from your team members. So you can start practicing focus work as an individual. If you can bring your team on board and together you work on improving the amount of focus work, that makes it easier. As you expand from a single team to multiple teams to an organization to a business unit, then unfortunately it's not like flipping a light switch. We went from light to dark. I've got all kinds of distractions. I've got all kinds of interruptions. And the other aspect of it is people are rewarded for working the way they do. So we have conversations with the management team to change that. And one of the things that we tend to see over and over is people have lots of assignments. Each assignment has a task due date, and those task due dates become the de facto priorities. So I've got 5 things due on Friday, so I work on all 5 of them. I work a little bit on this one, a little bit on that one, a little bit on this one. So I make a little progress on all of them, but I don't finish anything. And I do that. And so it can take a week or more to finish a task that I could probably finish in a day if I just focused on it. So if that's your world and you're not getting clear priorities from your managers, I tell folks, well, if your managers aren't giving you clear priorities, that means you get to choose. So pick one, right? And I don't care whether it's the one that's the most fun or it's a task that I get to work with Gwen, and that's fun, so I'll do that one first. But pick a task, focus on it, finish it, catch your breath, pick another task, focus on it, finish it. You'll actually finish the task faster if you work in a single tasking fashion than if you work on all of them at the same time, switching back and forth, because that switching has a huge cost in productivity. It's not unlike if you go to a manufacturing floor and you pick a particular machine. If you tell the operator to keep breaking setup and switching to a different job and breaking setup and switching to a different job, every time you break setup, you're losing productivity. Same thing happens when you're doing thinking work. Every time you get interrupted, it takes time to mentally get back to where you were. So that continual switching, it is honestly the biggest robber baron of productivity in the project.
So I have a question about if someone were, you mentioned that it's important for managers to create the kind of environment where people can work this way productively. But what if somebody doesn't have a manager who has that insight? How would you recommend they approach their manager about allowing them to put these systems in place, or this work method?
Right. So it kind of reminds me of, you may have seen the picture where, here's my sphere of control, here's my sphere of influence, here's my sphere of concern. So you start with, what do you have control of? And it may just be you and your work. So what can I do to get more focused work? How do I minimize interruptions? And there's different things you can do at the personal productivity. I mean, turn off the notifications on your email, turn off the notifications on your phone, turn your phone off, put it on the other side of the room. So that when you run in, you're working on something and you're like kind of stuck, and it's easy to I'll just pick up my phone and I'll distract myself for 20 minutes. But that's not very productive. So I'll even, when I have something where I really need to focus, I'll even turn off, I use Outlook for my email. I close Outlook, not just turn off the notifications, but close it. So again, when you're working and you're like, oh, I'll just check emails real quick, because you're just mentally, that's what your brain does. It dances all over the place. Well, if I have to go completely reopen it, that just seems like too much work. So other things, and sometimes you just have to take a brain break, when you're working on something that's really big and mentally challenging. So some people find getting up and going for a walk, so most folks, have some sense of the things that help them. So draw on that and use that. but look at how do I minimize the distractions. Another one that's common, and I've found it really effective, especially working with kids. It's called the Pomodoro technique, and the name comes from you use a timer, and so picture a tomato-shaped kitchen timer. So Pomodoro is
Mm-hmm.
tomato. So you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to focus for, and you get to pick. Is it 5 minutes? Is it 8 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? And most people, when they'll start, they'll say like 5 minutes or 8 minutes. So you set the timer for 8 minutes. I'm going to focus for 8 minutes, and I'm going to keep myself focused on this. And then when the timer dings, you give yourself a 5-minute break. And then you do another 8 minutes, and you give yourself a 5-minute break. And so you do 3 cycles, and then you give yourself a 15-minute break. And so you can grade yourself by how many Pomodoros was I able to do today,
Mm.
you know, and cycles. And then when you're getting there, you say, well, instead of 8 minutes, I'll do 12, or I'll do 20. And again, back to the work norms. When my kids were younger, we had conversations as a family, because I've been working from home for a long time. My wife sometimes works from home, and so even in my office, when I need to talk to somebody, you know, so one of those work norms is talking about channels of communications. So if I need some information from one of my colleagues, you know, I'll send them an email, and that says, hey, I need this, but it's not urgent. If it's a little more urgent, then we tend to use you know, our chat messages, and you'll get a response quicker. If it's really urgent, like I'm on site, I'm working with a client, and oh my gosh, you know, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do, then I pick up the phone and I call one of my colleagues. And so if I get a phone call from one of my colleagues, I know, okay, this is like a 911 thing. So I will do everything I can to interrupt myself and go help them. If I'm with a client myself, I may not be able to. So having those conversations about which channels are we going to use for what level of urgency on the information. But in our house, my wife actually had a little stand, and she'd put a flag in it. And she had a green flag and a yellow flag and a red flag. And green meant you can interrupt mom. You know, the kids knew there. If it was yellow, it was like, I really would prefer you don't, but if you have to, you can. And a red flag basically said, I'm talking with a client, unless the house is on fire, don't interrupt me. and even our small kids, like, they got that, you know, it's like, okay, there's a red flag. We'll go find dad. Don't bother mom.
I love that.
Just examples of what I mean when I say, you know, work norms, and that can work whether it's in the home, it's with your spouse. I mean, I walk in, and my wife and I, if it's during work hours, the first question is, are you interruptible? And no is an acceptable answer. So if not, I'm like, no. And she leaves. And now I know that she needs to talk to me. In fact, sometimes all she has to do is walk in. My peripheral vision, I see her there. She can tell I'm focused, so she leaves. And then when I get to a point where it's a natural stopping point, it makes sense to take a brain break, then I go track her down and say, okay, and we sit down, we have a conversation. You know, now if it's more urgent than that, the same thing, channels of communication. If it really is urgent, it's okay to interrupt. But so that's one thing, is just to set those work norms and get agreements on how we're going to work together. Looping back to your question of how do I create that environment as a manager? So what we see most often is people are held accountable for meeting their dates. The issue with that is that nothing finishes early. And if it does, as a manager, you won't hear about it. Right? Because I've negotiated a due date, and if I was to finish that early, then I'm basically giving up my power to negotiate next time. So in the world that we want to move into, I encourage managers to hold people accountable for working on their number one priority task, working on it in a focused manner, handing it off quickly when they finish, and asking for help if they get stuck. And that last one is especially important. You know, if you're working with engineers and scientists, and I'm an engineer, so I say this, you know, we don't like to ask for help. It's like asking for help is sort of like saying, I don't know why you hired me because I can't do this job. So instead, if I get stuck on a task, I'll go work on something else. I can stay busy. But if I have a critical task that determines how quickly the project finishes, I don't want, as a manager, I don't want you to just go work on something else. I want you to raise your hand and say, I can't move this obstacle. I need help. So that's what we're looking at as a manager. When you're walking around, I find questions that work really well is, so what's keeping you from finishing your number one priority task? That question will get me actionable information as a manager. Instead of, how are things going?
Mm-hmm.
I won't get actionable information. But how are things going? How are you doing? Any problems? But if I say, what's keeping you from finishing your number one priority task any faster? Well, if they don't know what the number one priority task is, they're going to put that on the table, and now I can help address it. And the answer I'm hoping for is them saying, you interrupted me with that dumb question. Go away, please. Right? And that's actionable.
Well, I noticed you said earlier in the as you're triaging how to communicate your request to someone, that an urgent message would be worthy of a call. And what I'm hearing in organizations is that people just don't answer their phone anymore. Like,
correct.
So I think that would be really helpful to have a conversation about the priority of the request and how you ask for help. So should I send an email? Should I send a chat message, or can I call? If people knew that a phone call was an urgent message, they would be more likely to pick it up.
Right.
But I think we've gotten used to not answering the phone.
Yeah. If I get a phone call and my phone isn't telling me who's calling and I don't know them, right? That's where we all are today. I don't answer that.
Yeah.
But if it's your team, it's like, oh, Travis is calling me, and I know that Travis is on site with a client this week, then yeah, okay, I'm gonna answer it. What's up? So, but the key is, like, really, I guess with all relationships, it's having those conversations. And so one that's worth talking about is, what channels are we going to use for what communications? Another one I've seen used very well is within emails, in the subject line. Again, have conversations about this. But so when I'm looking at my emails, I'm just looking at the subject line, and I can tell, is this info? Is this for action? Is this? And so just putting, agreeing on a set of words so that you can quickly see, okay, what's the priority of this? Is this something I need to get back to right now or not?
Yeah. They seem like small things, but they can make a huge difference.
They really do. And I often, so rather than working to task due dates, we're asking people to work to task priorities. And so again, you can do this at the team level, you can do this at the individual, at the personal level, is thinking about, and I tell folks, what I'm striving for is at any point during the day, I know what the most important thing I need to finish is. It might be a work task. It might be spending time, with one of my kids on a project they're working on. It might be attending one of my kids' sports events. Whatever the case may be. It might be sitting down and just having a fun conversation with my wife. But if I know that what I'm currently doing is indeed the most important thing I need to be doing, it helps me be more fully in the moment. And in terms of work, or even in your hobbies, the more you can do focused work, then it allows you to get into, you've probably heard the term flow. It allows you to get into flow. So help as a manager, helping folks move into working, creating this environment where people can work this way. I mean, the good news is people prefer to work that way. I got hired on to do a particular job for these skills that I've studied for, that I'm good at and I enjoy doing. When I get to focus on that kind of work and do that kind of work and do it well, how does that make you feel at the end of the day? As opposed to, here you are at the supper table at the end of the day, your spouse or your partner says, so how was your day? And you're like, oh, I was so busy. I was running around my hair on fire all day long. And it's like, yeah, well, so what did you get done? And you realize, I didn't finish anything.
Hmm.
Right? I was busy,
Mhm.
and I remember living in that world, and it's kind of frustrating. Well, it's very frustrating.
So you work mostly with teams, and at Coach.me, we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are people, or they may have positions where they're not necessarily, or they're project based, so they have multiple teams that they're working with. So the priorities are not necessarily obvious, and what I'm finding with coaching clients is that this wonderful new way of working remotely has people isolated and without structure in their day, and so it may be, and there may not be deadlines associated with projects. You may have to figure out your own prioritization. Do you have any suggestions for folks in that situation that don't have much structure and don't have a team to sort out their priorities with?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's true. I've been working remote for, gosh, almost 20 years now. So it's fun because now more people have had the opportunity to have that liberty of working, and they now have. Before, it was hard to explain to people what my work life was like because it was so different than most people's. But I kind of touched on this earlier, is making a plan. And some people do it each day, some people do it each week. And so whatever works for you. And my wife is a morning person, so she tends to start her day by making her to finish list. What are the things I'm going to get done today? And of those things, what's the most important? So just basically setting the priorities for the day. And she's self-employed as well, so there's not a manager that's giving her that. I tend to do it at the end of the day. I'm thinking about tomorrow, and I find I'm most productive if I do that. Cause I get up in the morning, I'm still kind of groggy, but I look at my plan and go, oh yeah. I tell myself this is what I was going to focus on today. This is the most important thing, and then I get started with that. The other thing that can help on that is that, and this is a technique that I've been using for quite a while as well, is when I'm making my plan, I think about, so what do I need from others? And what do others need from me? And I list those out. And then what are my priorities? So I start the day, I open up email, and I send off emails or chat messages, whatever the appropriate channel, asking for the information that I need. And then I answer those for folks that have asked information of me. And then I close Outlook. And then I spend the next, typically hour and a half to 2 hours focusing on my most important task. As the day goes on, it becomes harder to focus because, for one thing, I work in a lot of different time zones. So I'm in the Eastern time zone. So the other side of the country starts to wake up and they start to reach out and ask for help. But if you start the day by opening up your email and then just going down your emails, you're now working to somebody else's priorities. Right? If you think about that, it's like, here's a whole bunch of priorities from somebody else. Well, what about your priorities? So especially if you don't have a team environment, you haven't got a manager where collectively you're saying, what are the critical tasks this week? Which of those are mine? How can I help accelerate completion of those tasks? Then it's kind of on you. Well, what are the priorities? And so being able to know what's the most important thing I need to finish can help you do that. And when you build your to finish list, hopefully you're putting things on there that are things that are indeed important to you, that matter to you, that you can see how doing this is, here's the impact it's going to have. And so that helps with the motivation, and that bleeds into better productivity.
I really like your idea of the to finish list because I think about, actually, it's probably a couple of years ago, I would have a to-do list for the weekend to do laundry, but I would not necessarily put everything away. And put away in the and so I would think that I
You're coming across very clipped and kind of broken, so I'm not catching everything you're saying, Gwen.
okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, you seem to be back now.
You're frozen.
Yeah, so your video is frozen. I don't know if it's on your side or on mine.
Yeah. Okay, I'm waiting. Oh, an error.
Okay. You were talking about doing laundry, but not finishing the task in the sense of putting things away.
Yes. Okay. I'm. You were frozen, and I think I wasn't coming through clearly. So anyway, I like the term about a fit to. So on the to finish list, do you break down that there is something that can?
That's one technique that can be helpful. It's kind of, I'll offer this, same as when I'm working with a team and they're building a model of their workflow. I tell them, we start by building a model. Maybe it's just 10 or 12 tasks, even if it's a year-long project. What are the main pieces and how do those fit
Having a
together?
connection error again.
Okay. So build out that model, the workflow. Start with the high-level picture because it's very easy to add additional detail at any point through the life of the project. And so I tell the team, add detail only when and to the extent that it's useful. Same thing is true on an individual level. So I'm building my to finish list. And so I put down, all right, this is the most important thing I need to finish. Well, if that's not enough for me to clearly know, well, what action should I be taking? Then, hit that with a hammer of smaller pieces, maybe think through the logic of this has to happen before this, and just sketch out a little project plan, if you will, even if it's just 4 or 5 tasks to help you clarify in your mind, oh, well, these are the tasks. This is the first task I need to do, and then this one. And do I have to do them all? Can I delegate some of these? So that's an excellent question. It's like add detail when and to the extent it's helpful or it's useful, but avoid the trap of adding detail just for the sake of adding detail.